I should have known trouble was brewing when Camilla Keating marched up my front walk with that pink violation notice in her hand like it was a winning lottery ticket. Her eyes gleamed with the unique joy that only comes from catching someone breaking one of her precious HOA rules. As the self-appointed queen of Sunnyside Acres, our supposedly idyllic suburban community, Camilla had tormented residents for years with her tyrannical enforcement of regulations, many of which seemed to materialize overnight to suit her personal vendettas. "Mr. Sanders," she chirped with artificial sweetness as I opened my door. "I'm afraid your garden situation has become quite the eyesore." I looked past her to my front yard, where I'd spent the last 6 months creating a vibrant native plant garden. After 20 years in the military and 3 tours overseas, gardening had become my therapy, my peace. Every bloom represented a small victory over the PTSD that still occasionally gripped me in the dead of night. "My garden meets all landscaping requirements, Mrs. Keating," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I checked the bylaws before I planted the first seed." She tilted her head, blonde highlights catching the spring sunlight. "The board voted last night on new aesthetic standards. Your wildflowers are simply too chaotic. You have 14 days to replace them with approved plants from our new list." She thrust the pink paper into my hand. I glanced down at the notice. The approved plants were all non-native ornamentals that required excessive watering in our drought-prone region, coincidentally all available at Premium Gardens, the landscaping company owned by her husband, Gerald. "This is ridiculous," I said. "These plants are environmentally sustainable and—" "Rules are rules, Keith." Her smile never reached her eyes. "Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $100. We do so value neighborhood uniformity." As she walked away, I noticed her pausing to take photos of other yards on our street. This wasn't just about my garden. This was about control and profit. Little did Camilla know, she had just declared war on a retired tactical operations specialist who had nothing but time on his hands and a stubborn streak a mile wide. I spent that night researching HOA laws and discovered something fascinating. Our neighborhood covenant had specific protections for gardens that served therapeutic purposes for veterans. A provision I suspected Camilla had conveniently overlooked during her midnight regulation revisions. The next morning, I called my neighbor Hannah Jefferson, an environmental lawyer who had her own history with Camilla after a dispute about solar panels. "She's done this before," Hannah confirmed over coffee on my patio, her dark curls dancing in the breeze as she shook her head. "Creates new rules without proper notification, targets specific homeowners, then offers her husband's company as the solution. Classic racket." "So what can we do?" I asked, watching a hummingbird flit between my native columbines, plants that would soon be contraband according to Camilla's decree. Hannah smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd been waiting for this opportunity. "We fight back. Legally, strategically, and with just enough creativity to stay within the rules while driving her absolutely mad." That's when the idea hit me. If Camilla thought my current garden was chaotic, I would show her what chaos truly looked like. A perfectly compliant, meticulously designed chaos that would make my front yard both a neighborhood statement and her personal nightmare. "Hannah," I said slowly, "how specific are the height restrictions for plants in the bylaws?" 3 feet maximum for front yards," she replied. "But there are exceptions for decorative structures and designated garden pathways." "Perfect." I pulled out a sketch pad and began drawing. "I'm going to need your help with something that's both completely legal and completely infuriating." For the next week, I worked from sunrise to sunset. Instead of removing my garden as Camilla had demanded, I expanded it, creating an elaborate pathway system throughout my front yard. Each path was carefully lined with the tallest allowed flowers and shrubs, creating walls of vibrant color that twisted and turned according to my precise design. At the center, I installed a small seating area with a plaque dedicating the garden to veterans struggling with PTSD, making it officially therapeutic and protected. What appeared random to casual observers was actually a carefully designed maze based on military navigation exercises I'd once taught. To traverse it properly required either the map I kept in my pocket or a significant amount of trial and error. Every turn led to either a beautiful native plant display with educational information, or a dead end featuring a mirror that reflected the visitor's frustrated expression back at them. I called it the Reflection Garden, a name with multiple meanings that pleased my newfound sense of mischief. On day 13 of my 14-day compliance window, I put the finishing touches on my creation: motion-activated solar lights that illuminated the pathways at night, and a small water feature powered by collected rainwater. The garden was a stunning display of environmental responsibility, veteran appreciation, and malicious compliance. Hannah stopped by that evening to admire my work. "Keith," she said, walking the correct path to the center seating area without a single wrong turn. She'd helped test the design. "This is either the most brilliant form of protest I've ever seen or the thing that finally pushes Camilla over the edge." "Why not both?" I replied, handing her a lemonade made with mint from the garden. We sat there as the sun set, imagining Camilla's face when she discovered that I had technically complied with her demand by completely transforming my garden, just not in the way she'd intended. The thought provided more peace than any meditation session ever had. The next morning, exactly 14 days after receiving the notice, I was watering some new plantings when a familiar figure appeared at the entrance to my garden. Camilla stood there in her cream-colored pantsuit, mouth slightly open as she took in the transformation. What have you done?" she finally managed, her voice higher than usual. "Good morning, Mrs. Keating," I said pleasantly. "I've addressed your concerns about my garden. Would you like a tour? This is not compliance." "This is fully within HOA regulations," I finished for her. "Every plant is under height restrictions, the garden is well maintained, and it serves as a therapeutic environment for veterans with PTSD, which is protected under Section 7 of our covenant." I held up a laminated copy of the relevant bylaw section that I now kept by the garden entrance. "I've even provided educational signage about native plants, which falls under the Community Enrichment Clause." Her face flushed red as she snatched the paper from my hand and scanned it. "You can't just create a maze in your front yard. It's a pathway garden with dedicated walking areas, also specifically allowed in the bylaws. Would you like to experience it? The center has a lovely seating area." She narrowed her eyes. "I know what you're doing, Sanders. This won't stand." "I believe it will. Unless you'd like to explain to the neighborhood why you're targeting a garden dedicated to veterans' mental health?" I gestured to the new sign at the entrance that clearly stated the garden's purpose, complete with military insignia. Camilla's lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed away, but not before I noticed her taking several photos of my creation. I knew this wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. 3 days later, I received another violation notice, this time claiming my garden created a public safety hazard by obstructing clear lines of sight and potentially harboring wildlife that could pose risks to residents. The fine was set at $200 per day until the issue was resolved. I immediately texted Hannah, who arrived that evening with a thick folder under her arm and fire in her eyes. "She's getting desperate," Hannah said, spreading documents across my kitchen table. I took the liberty of reviewing all HOA financial records for the past 5 years. Public corporations are required to maintain transparency, even homeowners associations. "And?" I prompted, sensing she had found something significant. "And there are irregularities. Big ones." She pointed to several highlighted entries. "Premium Gardens has been the exclusive contractor for all common area maintenance, charging rates well above market value. There are also several special assessments that were collected for projects that were either never completed or done at significantly reduced scope." I whistled. "You think she's been siphoning HOA funds into her husband's business? I think it's worth investigating further. But more importantly, it gives us leverage. Meanwhile, we need to address this ridiculous safety hazard claim. The next day, we invited the local fire marshal to inspect the garden. Not only did he find no safety issues, but he also commended the design for using drought-resistant plants that reduced fire risk compared to traditional lawns. I made sure to get his assessment in writing. Word of my garden battle with Camilla began spreading throughout the neighborhood. Neighbors who had suffered under her regime of fines and harassment started stopping by, ostensibly to view the garden, but really to offer support and share their own HOA horror stories. Eliza Thompson from 2 doors down had been fined for having a basketball hoop that was 3 inches taller than regulation. Marcus Wong across the street received violations for his holiday decorations being culturally inappropriate, despite celebrating his own heritage. Patricia Oakes, an elderly widow, had been harassed about her rose bushes until she finally paid Camilla's husband's company to maintain them at exorbitant rates. Each story strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about my garden anymore. It was about standing up to a bully who had been exploiting our community for years. On Sunday afternoon, I noticed increased traffic past my house, neighbors driving slowly, some even parking to take photos of my garden. By evening, I discovered why. Camilla had called an emergency HOA meeting for Monday night to discuss urgent neighborhood safety concerns and eyesore properties degrading home values. Hannah and I spent that night preparing. We compiled statements from neighbors, the fire marshal's report, relevant bylaw sections, and financial records that raised questions about HOA fund management. If Camilla wanted a showdown, we would be ready. The community center was packed for the Monday night meeting. I recognized faces I hadn't seen at HOA gatherings in years. Camilla sat at the front table with Gerald and 2 other board members, looking simultaneously smug and annoyed at the unprecedented turnout. "Thank you all for coming," she began with practiced authority. "We have several urgent matters to discuss, primarily concerning property standards that affect our collective home values." She clicked to the first slide in her presentation, a photo of my garden maze. "As you can see, we have a situation that has gotten out of hand. What began as an unapproved wildflower patch has transformed into an inappropriate labyrinth that creates safety hazards, attracts unwanted wildlife, and frankly, makes our distinguished community look like an amusement park." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I couldn't tell if they were agreeing or disagreeing with her assessment. Therefore, the board has unanimously voted to amend the landscaping bylaws to prohibit maze-like structures and excessive pathway configurations in front yards, effective immediately. Mr. Sanders will have 7 days to remove the violation or face daily fines and potential legal action. I raised my hand. Camilla pretended not to see me, but several neighbors pointed in my direction until she couldn't ignore me any longer. "Yes, Mr. Sanders?" she said with barely concealed irritation. I stood. "I'd like to address several factual inaccuracies in your presentation. First, my garden was inspected by Fire Marshal Rodriguez just last week and declared completely safe. I have his report here." I held up the document. "Second, the garden is specifically designed as a therapeutic environment for veterans with PTSD, which is protected under Section 7 of our covenant." "Regardless," Camilla interrupted, "the board has the authority to amend bylaws when necessary for community welfare. With proper notice and homeowner input," Hannah interjected, also standing. "Bylaw amendments require 30 days' notice and an open comment period before voting, according to state law. This emergency amendment is procedurally invalid." Camilla's smile tightened. "Ms. Jefferson, while we appreciate your legal opinion, the board has consulted with our own attorneys." "Have you?" Hannah asked innocently. "Because I took the liberty of contacting Mr. Prentice at Richards and Holden this morning, and he seemed quite surprised to learn about this emergency meeting. In fact, he confirmed that no such consultation occurred." A ripple of whispers spread through the room. Camilla's face flushed. "We consulted different counsel," she snapped. "I see," Hannah continued. While we're discussing HOA governance, perhaps you could explain some financial discrepancies I've noticed in the quarterly reports. She opened her folder. Specifically, the $47,000 collected last year for the playground renovation that somehow only resulted in a new swing set valued at approximately $12,000? Gerald Keating stood up abruptly. This meeting is about landscaping violations, not financial matters. We should stay on topic. But the damage was done. Neighbors were now openly talking amongst themselves, and I could see questioning looks directed at the board table. Camilla tapped her gavel loudly. Order, please! We will address financial questions at the appropriate quarterly review. Now, returning to the matter at hand. I have a question, called out Patricia Oakes, the elderly widow who had been forced to hire Gerald's company. Why is it that every time someone gets a violation notice, the only approved solution seems to involve hiring premium gardens? More voices joined in, years of frustration finally finding an outlet. The meeting was slipping out of Camilla's control. Perhaps, I suggested during a brief lull, we should take a vote of no confidence in the current board and elect new representatives who will administer the HOA with transparency and fairness. You can't do that, Camilla protested. This meeting was called to address violations, not to hold elections. Hannah stood again. Actually, according to our bylaws, any member can propose a vote of no confidence at any properly noticed meeting if seconded by 10% of attending members. Hands shot up across the room, far more than 10%. Camilla looked panicked now. This is ridiculous. We've maintained property values and community standards for years. By intimidation and selective enforcement, Marcus Wong called out. My Christmas decorations were too much, but the Keatings' Halloween display that blocked the sidewalk for a month was perfectly fine. The meeting devolved into open rebellion. Neighbors shared stories of unfair treatment, while Camilla ineffectively banged her gavel. Gerald sat stone-faced, occasionally whispering urgently to his wife. Finally, Hannah called for order. I propose we adjourn this meeting and reconvene in 2 weeks for a properly noticed election of new board members. In the meantime, I suggest an independent audit of HOA finances for the past 5 years. The motion carried overwhelmingly. As the meeting broke up, I found myself surrounded by neighbors offering support and thanking me for standing up to Camilla. For the first time since moving to Sunnyside Acres, I felt part of a community rather than subject to a regime. Camilla and Gerald slipped out a side door, avoiding the crowd. Their hasty exit spoke volumes. The following morning, I was tending to my garden when a police car pulled up in front of my house. My heart sank. Had Camilla found some way to escalate this to law enforcement? Officer Rivera approached with a professional nod. Mr. Sanders? I'm following up on a complaint about your property. Let me guess. I sighed. Mrs. Keating called it in? Actually, no. We received an anonymous tip about potential HOA fraud, with documents delivered to the station this morning. Since you were mentioned in the materials as having recent disputes with the board, I wanted to get your statement. I blinked in surprise. Someone had taken matters into their own hands. Over the next week, the neighborhood buzzed with activity and gossip. Officers were seen visiting the Keating residence twice. Hannah organized a committee to review HOA procedures and prepare for the upcoming election. And most surprisingly, 3 more reflection gardens sprouted up on our street, as neighbors inspired by my stand created their own native plant displays. Camilla and Gerald were notably absent from public view until the night before the rescheduled HOA meeting, when moving trucks appeared outside their house. By morning, they were gone, a hastily posted, "For sale," sign the only evidence they had ever lived there. The meeting that night was both somber and celebratory. Officer Rivera made a brief appearance to inform residents that investigations into financial improprieties were ongoing, with preliminary findings suggesting over $200,000 in HOA funds had been misappropriated over the years, primarily through inflated contracts to premium gardens and phantom projects that were paid for but never completed. Hannah was unanimously elected as the new HOA president, with Marcus Wong as treasurer and Patricia Oakes as secretary. Their first official act was to pass new bylaws protecting environmental landscaping and veteran support initiatives, while establishing transparent procedures for all future rule changes. As for me, I became something of a local celebrity. My garden maze was featured in the local paper under the headline, "Veterans Therapeutic Garden Uncovers HOA Corruption." Garden clubs from neighboring towns organized tours, and I began offering workshops on native plant gardening for other veterans struggling with PTSD. 2 months later, as summer reached its peak, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Officer Rivera with a more relaxed demeanor than during his official visits. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "The Keatings were arrested in Arizona this morning. They'd apparently been running similar schemes in 3 other states before settling here. Gerald is looking at serious fraud charges, and Camilla is implicated in most of them." "Justice served," I remarked, feeling a complex mix of vindication and pity. "Would you like to see how the garden's coming along? The Black-Eyed Susans are really putting on a show this week." He accepted, and as we walked the pathways of my now flourishing creation, I reflected on how a simple garden had become so much more: a stand against corruption, a community rallying point, and yes, a maze from which Camilla Keating had ultimately been unable to escape. That evening, as twilight settled over Sunnyside Acres, neighbors gathered in my garden for an impromptu celebration. Hannah brought wine, Marcus prepared his famous grilled vegetables, and Patricia arrived with her signature lavender cookies. Children laughed as they raced through the garden paths, their parents calling out hints when they hit dead ends. As I watched my neighbors enjoy the space that had once been the center of so much controversy, Hannah stepped up beside me. "You know," she said, handing me a glass of wine, "when you first created this garden, I thought you were just being stubborn. Wasn't I?" I smiled. "Maybe. But you also created something beautiful that brought this community together." She gestured to the gathering. "Look at us now, actually talking to each other, sharing food, letting kids play freely." When was the last time this happened in Sunnyside Acres? Probably never, I admitted. Camilla wasn't big on community events unless they involved property value presentations. Hannah laughed. "The preliminary audit shows she spent more on color printing those presentations than on actual community improvements." As darkness fell, the solar lights activated along the pathways, casting a gentle glow that transformed the garden into something magical. Someone started playing guitar, and Patricia led a few neighbors in an impromptu dance on the lawn. "We're thinking of making this official," Hannah said after a comfortable silence. "A monthly neighborhood gathering that rotates between houses. No agendas, no property value discussions, just neighbors being neighbors." "I'd like that," I said, realizing how much I'd isolated myself after returning from my last deployment. The garden had begun as therapy for me alone, but it had grown into something that helped heal an entire community. The next morning, I was adding new mulch to some pathways when a young couple stopped at my garden entrance. They looked hesitant, glancing at the Veterans Reflection Garden sign with uncertainty. "Is it okay if we walk through?" the woman asked. "We just moved in down the street." "Of course," I said, brushing dirt from my hands and walking over to greet them. "I'm Keith Sanders." "Lucy and Daniel Moreno," the man replied, shaking my hand. "We heard stories about this garden from our real estate agent. Something about it bringing down a corrupt HOA president." I laughed. "That's a bit dramatic, but not entirely untrue. Would you like the full tour? There's quite a story behind each section." As I guided them through the twisting paths, explaining how native plants supported local pollinators and how the design elements helped with mindfulness exercises, I noticed Daniel running his hand over a memorial plaque for fallen soldiers. "Navy?" I asked, recognizing the subtle way he stood. He nodded. 2 tours in the Gulf. Still adjusting to civilian life. It's an ongoing process, I acknowledged. "If you're interested, we have a veterans gardening group that meets here on Saturdays. Nothing formal, just digging in dirt and talking, or not talking." Whatever helps. I might take you up on that, Daniel said, visibly relaxing. When we reached the center of the garden, Lucy gasped at the small reflecting pool surrounded by vibrant coneflowers and black-eyed Susans. It's beautiful. Our backyard is just empty lawn right now. I'd love to do something like this, but I don't know where to start. The neighborhood garden exchange is next weekend, I offered. Everyone brings divisions of their plants to share. Perfect way to start your own garden without breaking the bank. As they left, promising to return for both the veterans group and the plant exchange, I felt a sense of satisfaction deeper than anything I'd experienced since leaving the military. My small act of defiance against Camilla had rippled outward, creating connections I hadn't anticipated. Over the following months, those connections continued to grow. The HOA under Hannah's leadership became a model of transparency and community focus. The financial recovery from the Keatings' mismanagement was slow but steady, with most of the stolen funds eventually returned through legal settlements. My garden flourished through summer and into fall, with new elements added through community contributions, a small pergola built by Marcus and his teenage sons, bird feeders crafted by Patricia's grandchildren, and a stone meditation bench donated by a local veterans group that had heard our story. The Veterans Gardening Group expanded to include a dozen regular members, creating a support network that accomplished more than years of formal therapy had for some of us. Together, we started an initiative to install native plant gardens at the local VA hospital, bringing the healing power of nature to those still struggling with physical and invisible wounds. As autumn painted the garden in shades of gold and russet, I received a letter from a national gardening magazine requesting to feature my Maze of Justice, their dramatic title, not mine, in their spring issue. The editor had heard about our story and believed it would inspire other communities facing HOA overreach. I agreed on one condition, that the article focus not just on the conflict but on how the garden had ultimately united our neighborhood and created lasting positive change. The editor enthusiastically agreed, seeing the broader human interest angle. When the first snow dusted the garden in December, transforming the seed heads and dried stalks into crystalline sculptures, Hannah organized a winter solstice gathering around fire pits in my front yard. Standing there with hot cider, watching neighbors who had once been strangers laughing together under the stars, I couldn't help but marvel at how things had changed. "Penny for your thoughts," Hannah said, appearing at my elbow. "Just thinking about mazes," I replied. "How sometimes the journey through one leads you exactly where you need to be, even if it's not where you expect it to go." She smiled, her breath visible in the cold air. "Philosophy from a gardener? Gardens have a way of teaching life lessons," I said. "Patience, persistence, adaptation. And sometimes, the importance of standing your ground when it matters." The police investigation into the Keatings concluded shortly after the new year, with both facing significant jail time for fraud schemes that stretched back nearly a decade. The local paper ran a follow-up story that included quotes from former neighbors in other states who had experienced similar tactics from the couple. Winter passed slowly, the garden dormant but not dead beneath the snow. I spent the time planning expansions and improvements, consulting with both professional landscapers and my veteran gardening group about how to make the space even more accessible and therapeutic. By early spring, the first crocuses were pushing through the melting snow when I received an unexpected visitor. Officer Rivera, now promoted to detective, arrived with an evidence box. "Thought you might want these back," he said, handing me a stack of garden design sketches I had created during my initial planning. They were seized from the Keatings' home office during the investigation. Apparently, Camilla had been building quite a file on you. I flipped through the pages, surprised to see my original drawings annotated in angry red pen with phrases like, "clearly violates Section 12.3, and intentionally provocative design." She was obsessed. Rivera explained. "The prosecutors think your garden triggered her because it was the first time someone had found a way to completely outmaneuver her while staying within the rules. Her husband testified that she would stare at photos of your garden for hours, trying to find violations. So my garden maze really did trap her," I mused, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. In a manner of speaking, her lawyer is actually trying to use it as part of an obsessive-compulsive disorder defense, though I doubt that will get much traction given the years of calculated fraud. As Detective Rivera left, I stood at the edge of my garden, watching the early bees find the first blooms of spring. What had begun as an act of defiance had evolved into something far more meaningful, not just for me, but for an entire community. The following weekend, at the first official neighborhood garden party of the season, Hannah called for everyone's attention. Standing on the stone bench at the center of my garden, she raised her glass. 1 year ago, our community was divided, controlled by fear and arbitrary rules, she said. Today, we gather as friends in a garden that stands as a testament to what can happen when one person has the courage to stand up for what's right, with a healthy dose of creativity and just a touch of spite. Laughter rippled through the crowd. To Keith, she continued, whose stubborn refusal to tear down his garden led to tearing down something much worse. And to new beginnings for all of us. As glasses clinked and conversations resumed, Daniel Moreno approached me, his wife Lucy beside him. We wanted to show you this, Lucy said, handing me a sketch. Our backyard plan, inspired by your garden. We're creating a smaller reflection space with a focus on edible natives. Daniel's been using the design process as part of his therapy. The drawing showed a thoughtful layout that incorporated elements of my maze while adding unique features suited to their needs. A children's discovery area, raised beds for vegetables, and a small meditation space. It's wonderful, I said sincerely. Need any help with the installation? That's actually why we're showing you, Daniel replied. The veterans group voted to make it our spring project. First workday is next Saturday, if you're free to supervise. I wouldn't miss it, I assured them. As the party continued around us, I took a moment to walk the pathways of my garden alone, appreciating how each turn and plant had contributed to something far larger than I had initially envisioned. The garden that Camilla had demanded I destroy had instead destroyed her fraudulent empire and helped rebuild a community. Near the entrance, I paused to adjust the small sign that I had installed after the Keatings' arrest. It read simply, "Every garden is a journey. Choose your path wisely." Visitors often assumed it was just garden philosophy, not knowing it commemorated a very specific journey through corruption, community activism, and eventual justice. But perhaps that was fitting. The best paths forward aren't always about looking back. As I rejoined the gathering, accepting a plate of food from Patricia and congratulations from Marcus on the upcoming magazine feature, I felt truly at home for the first time since leaving the military. My reflection garden had done its job, allowing me to find my place in civilian life while creating space for others to find theirs as well. The maze had never been meant as a trap, despite what Camilla might have thought. It was always an invitation to slow down, to consider choices, to reflect. That she had seen only a challenge to her authority said more about her path than mine. That evening, as the sun set and neighbors lingered in the gentle spring air, Hannah sat beside me on the bench. "You know what I just realized?" she said. "1 year ago today was when you received that first violation notice." "Quite an anniversary," I acknowledged. "Indeed. From pink violation notices to community celebration. From fighting against something to building something new." She looked around at the neighbors chatting in small groups throughout the garden. "Not a bad year's work, Keith Sanders." "No," I agreed, watching a hummingbird visit the newly bloomed columbines, the very flowers that had started it all. "Not bad at all." As darkness fell and solar lights illuminated the pathways once more, I knew with certainty that I had found my way through my own personal maze. The garden would continue to evolve, as would our community, but the foundations we had built would remain, strong, resilient, and blooming with possibilities.